Well, we can talk now to Gerard Lyons, who's Senior Independent Director and Board Member of the Bank of China in the UK. Welcome to the programme. Good to see you, Gerard. Thank you for joining us. So we're hearing at this meeting something of an emphasis on stabilising employment, a more proactive fiscal policy. What do you make of the tone and the timing of this meeting?
Well, the tone of the meeting was very measured. The Chinese economy in the first half of the year has done far better than many economists expected. But nonetheless, the economy still faces significant challenges, both at home and still from overseas because of the tariff issue. So the timing of the meeting was particularly important, both given the current cycle facing those domestic challenges and also ahead of the five-year plan next year and the fourth plenum this October. Very importantly today, I felt, was the focus on employment, which is still stubbornly high in terms of youth unemployment, the focus on the need to boost consumption, and also the focus on involution, which is a buzzword in China, even though it's not talked about much outside.
It was more policy discussion, though, wasn't it, rather than specific measures. From a global investor's perspective, what sort of signals is that sending out?
Well, it's a very significant meeting because this time a year ago, the Politburo talked about the domestic competitive pressures in China. That's when they first used that word involution. The fear then was that prices were falling, deflation was taking hold, and if that continued, then the economic outlook would be far worse than it's proved to be. In fact, China has held up particularly well. What was very evident today was that the Chinese were going to take more measures to actually maintain domestic demand and also to try and address that competitive pressure that still exists within China. So it was very much a focus on keeping fiscal policy proactive, but also easing off slightly on monetary policy. They don't need to do everything now to help the economy. They can still keep some of their policy measures in reserve. So from an international perspective, the Chinese policymakers seem to be very much on the front foot.
I want to ask you briefly just about this idea of involution, as you say, not something that's widely talked about outside of China. How much of a concern is that?
It is a concern, very much the fact that President Xi Jinping himself has touched on the issue. Basically, the issue is this, that prices are falling. China still faces producer prices falling, consumer prices are around zero. The worry is that if you have deflation, then people will stop spending because they expect prices will continue to be lower in the future, and it will deter firms from investing. A year ago, the concern was that that was taking hold. Now what was important today was that the authorities are going to try and address the measures that have led to this, overinvestment in certain areas and also overinvestment by local authorities. So from a Chinese perspective, the measure is aimed at preventing deflation. It will allow some inflation back into the economy, and that will help stabilise domestic demand. It's an issue more particular to China than other economies, hence the Chinese are focused on it less so than international investors looking at China. But the international investors looking at China, I think, will be encouraged. Fiscal policy has been front-loaded so far this year, and now monetary policy is less dovish than it was a few months ago because the economy is held up. But there's the ability for monetary policy as well as fiscal policy to help stabilise the economy more in the second half of the year.
Gerard, it was great to talk to you today. Thank you so much for coming on the programme. That's Gerard Lyons from the Bank of China in the UK.